evening, everyone. We're back for, believe it or not, the 50th episode of OTJtv. Can't believe it. We've done this 50 times. David Juteau is here, and I can't even fathom that we're actually done this 50 times, but he was there for the start of it. Greg Hadley was one of the first podcast interview guests that we ever had back then. And this evening we have Dr. Andy Boon to have them talk about. Greg, you want to hold up that book? This book, everyone, which is something that I actually is a sort of a pet topic of mine, critical thinking. When Greg first came on to the podcast a couple of years ago, it was sort of one of those side issues that we were talking about, the general need to sort of be a little bit more sharper in the way that we looked at what's happening in universities. And when we were talking during the pandemic, we were talking about what universities, how they would be changing. And so when I saw that you had written that book, I thought, wow, that's really up his alley. What actually got you to, or what got you guys, I should say, to sort of team up and put this together?
I'll pass that to Greg because you were the initiator, the instigator of the project.
Yeah, it started. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, it started. I'll try to be brief on that, but it was. I started to get the idea for the book during the 2016 election in the United States. There was a lot of things that were happening on Facebook and Twitter at the time. It's when it just exploded with all sorts of rancor, people coming out of the woodwork. With that, there was also the Brexit debate going on. And I noticed how much in the way of bad thinking there was going on back and forth, people putting out stuff, the fake news types of things as well. But I thought this is a problem, and I began to think about how this is, since most of our students, at least here in Japan, are digital natives. They spend their lives on the internet. Maybe they're not following the American election or Brexit as much. I begin to think about the effects that a constant torrent of these types of messages would have on their critical thinking skills, and the implications that will have for society. For example, the subprime loan debacle was a result of poor critical thinking on the part of thousands of people. But so I had been introduced about a year and a half, almost 2 years earlier, to Jill Hadfield when she was at the JALT conference. And she had told me about this book series that she had, which I thought was a really interesting idea, where you had a concept that would be presented, and then activities that people could do in class that would actualize that. And then another section that would help people to figure out how to make a curriculum, and then that or to implement the ideas in a course with a textbook, and then a section on teaching teachers ways that they could conduct research to find out if their lessons had had any impact amongst their learners around that certain concept like that. And so I contacted her. She'd been a friend of mine on Facebook as well, and she was talking about some of the same people that I was worried about at the time. And she thought it was a good idea. And with this book, you have to have two authors, a person who's a materials designer, and that's Andy, and then someone like me who's a guy. But I was looking around. I was looking around for someone who could be a good materials designer, and I knew Andy, not as well as I had wanted to, but I reached out to him and had the chance to get to know him through this process. But he agreed, of course, and it's one of the best decisions I ever made for the project. So that's kind of the story in a very large nutshell.
I snicker at the thought that I will describe Gregory Hadley as some guy or a guy, but that's okay. And Andy, when Greg asked you to come on board, did you think, wow, I've always wanted to do something like this? And did you have like a whole bunch of things that you wanted to implement in the book?
I think it was actually on my bucket list. You know, I'd done the textbook, I'd done the graded readers, I'd done the book chapter, I'd done the journal publications. So the last thing was to put my name on an academic book. And I'd been thinking about it after I finished my PhD. I contacted several publishers about publishing my PhD idea, which I still haven't gotten around to yet. And so when Greg suggested or invited me to come on board, I was like, well, yeah, you hit me right at a good time. I was looking for a project post PhD, and yeah, it sounded really interesting. So I think I immediately agreed. He said, do you want to think about it? I was like, no, sign me up.
Have either of you actually tackled this topic before, either in a smaller article of 5,000 words or so, or in a chapter, or in a book? Greg, Andy's shaking his head, but Greg, have you ever tackled this topic before?
No, not critical thinking per se. Critical theory, yes, but they're not exactly, no, they're not the same thing. But no, I hadn't.
Was it?
No,
please go on. No, please go on.
Well, I was just going to say that a lot of the critical thinking books that you can find out there are primarily in the field of education, and the ones that are still extant have they've been reprints now for maybe sometimes 20 or 30 years. They're good books. I mean, it's not that there's nothing wrong with that, but there's not much of it in the way of you don't find it much really in the writings of Applied Linguistics and TESOL. We tend to be focused more on doing things, kind of cast, I think, sometimes into the role of language technicians, people who fix broken language, and think that maybe something like critical thinking is something we let somebody else do, or we will make a claim to critical thinking, or there'll be a textbook that will say, a language textbook says critical thinking skills are in this book, and it sounds good, but not really worked out in any way, shape, or form.
I've seen that before. Yeah. Books will say critical thinking, or it's like right in the title. Then you look through it and you go, not really sure you should be using that title in this book. What
when
did you
sorry, when they say critical thinking, they often mean higher order thinking skills, going back to Bloom. So like, okay, when we're addressing higher order thinking skills rather than critical thinking, which is a higher order thinking skill itself, but it's a little bit different.
Yeah, because those higher order thinking skills are based upon skills that you need to be able to, for example, have dispositions, or be able to structure a convincing argument that's not fallacious.
What did you guys find, or did you find anything difficult or surprisingly difficult? If neither of you had ever sort of tried to tackle critical thinking as a topic for a full-length academic book, did you find something that was surprisingly challenging to actually get the book out the door?
Yeah, I think basically just life getting in the way. With any project that anyone ever does, you have to balance work and personal life, and things happen in life. So, a lot of things happened to delay the book a little bit. So I think that was the biggest challenge, trying to find the time. I mean, Greg and I both work full time. We've got other things on our plate, so trying to dedicate the time to do it, it's a very time-consuming process.
Yeah.
When did you guys start the project?
1872.
Oh, okay.
Like that, yeah.
That's good. Good. It had muskets then, right?
I think we started in 2000. Well, it's drips and drabs.
2015, wasn't it? 16?
No, not 2016. No, it's 2018.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, it was about a year before the pandemic hit.
Wow. So this has been about 5 years then, almost 4.5 years then.
Yeah. Well, the book came out about what?
4 months, 5 months ago?
4 months ago, 4 or 5 months ago. Yeah.
Okay, so about 4 years. Did you think it would take that long?
No, No, I didn't think it would, but like Andy said, a lot of life got in the way. I think that the most difficult thing for me in trying to do this book was, yeah, apart from what Andy said about the life getting in the way, is that when you go through the different books in education that teach critical thinking, attempt to teach critical thinking to native speaking students,
Mhm.
there's a lot of differences, for example, in what type, the names, the labels for logical fallacies, for example,
Mhm.
or a different approach onto what sort of process that you would go through to help your students to become better critical thinkers. And so going through a lot of that literature, it's quite confusing. So we created a much more of a streamlined uh, nomenclature and process for students, well, and for teachers as well, to teach and to experience critical thinking for themselves. And it's based on, all, but I'm not going to show all the books I've got here on critical thinking here, but it's based on, a deep reading of those materials. It was hard to make that process, but once we had that in place, it helped to make all of the activities that Andy made have a greater sense of coherence on their own. Each of them are great, but then if you can see how they fit within the wider process of leading someone along to become more of a critical thinker over several cycles, and yeah, it was really helpful, but it was hard to get there. Hard to
So
get.
Greg came up with a cyclical process for introducing critical thinking to learners, and he explained it to me, bounced the ideas off. And when we agreed on the terms, then it was over to me to try and figure out activities that would help to realize the cycle, the process, and help teachers to introduce that to their learners.
Yeah,
And Greg's going to explain.
yeah, there it is. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Andy, you can keep on talking and just let them see it.
Well, do you want to explain the cycle, and then I can explain some of the. I'll give an activity that relates to one of them.
That would be great.
Yeah, Greg, you explain, and then I'll give one of the activities.
Sure. You see it right here. We start out with a focus on dispositions, and there's a big debate, of course, of is a disposition, is that something that a person's born with, or can people cultivate them? And we come on the side that they can be cultivated. Dispositions mean that you develop an attitude towards yourself and towards others, that you try to stay open, and you try to stay curious, and you're also humble about how little you may know about something, and you may want to come more with an attitude of learning. And even if you find yourself, you're talking to someone who's an ancient alien theorist or something, you still want to try to be humble about this discussion that you may be having, or they may be wanting to have with you. And we have a lot of activities in the book on developing different types of dispositions. They're very important because without them, the other parts of these processes are pretty much a logical thinking practice. And if you lack the dispositions, then all you really do is you learn how to become a spin meister by learning to listen to try to refute, so that you can try to prove a point that and you didn't listen or learn, and they didn't listen or learn either. But then you think of this cycle sort of like a Tai Chi basic practice, where you receive the person's ideas, you think about them, you reason for a while, and then you respond back with any rebuttals that are based that where you've seen some weak points. And the idea is not to try to catch them and to tear them down, but to see if together you can work to have a better idea, a better solution, or a more of an honest discussion about whatever topic that's going on. And this goes several times, in a class where you you'll do many activities along these lines of dispositions, receiving, reasoning, responding, and then going back to developing more dispositions, and you keep on doing this several times throughout a course, and you can integrate this within whatever language lessons you are doing. And you can think about the discussion parts and how to have people to learn how to think more critically as they're communicating. So yeah, that's sort of that in a nutshell.
And Andy, what was your process in taking that basic system and turning it into activities for teachers to use?
I mean, basically the structure of part two of the book is 93 workable activities for teachers to use in their classes with students of various levels. And so the first process I had to do was how am I going to approach the activities? So we basically decided there would be 20 activities, 5 for each of the processes on Greg's cycle. So that added up to 20 activities. And then in the book, there's a list of different types of logical fallacies. So for each fallacy, we have 3 activities to introduce learners to the fallacy at different levels, one at a beginner level, one at an intermediate, and one at an advanced.
Good.
Not to say that the advanced couldn't be used with the beginners and vice versa. We have to think about bilingualism in the classroom, and for teachers who are bilingual, use the strength of the L1 to help with the advanced activities as well. And so my idea was just to go through. Thank you very much. So Greg explained the cycle to me. He passed me this part of his chapter 1, and then I worked with this to create 93 activities. I used my experience of 20 odd years in the language classroom to do so. And when you create an activity, when you're writing materials, you see the classroom as you write, and you see how it would work with learners. And the great thing is when you then take them into the classroom, and then what you realized when you were making the activity actually happens. It's really nice. That's the positivity of material writing. To go to the first activity of developing dispositions, the idea about prove it, which is the first activity, is about looking for evidence to support facts. And I think the whole idea of developing disposition resonates with the classic Who song, Won't Get Fooled Again. Hopefully you've got that song playing in your mind now. And the whole idea is that, we want our students not to be tricked with language, and to push factual statements a little bit more and to question them. Don't accept everything at face value. Now, I had the pleasure of starting a new class this semester, and part of my introduction class was to use the prove it activity. Now, many teachers will use the wonderful tool of true or false in the classroom as an icebreaker. So I'm going to say 5 things that are true or false about me. Work in a team, you have to guess if they're true or false. So for example, I would say, I play the guitar, or I'm from England, or I've written many books for English language learners. So students have to work together and to decide whether they're true or false, which is great. It's a fun activity. But then to add the layer of critical thinking onto that, once the students have gone through that and they've learned a little about you, and you've said, well, these things are true. Now let's go back to the true things. I'm saying they're true, but what evidence would you require of me to prove it? I mean, I could say I'm English, but I might not be. You can probably tell from the accent, but so how and then so students are, I've worked at my university for 18 years. How would you prove it? So then the students work together, and one student put his hand up and went, check your pay slips. I said, well, I don't ever happen going back there, but it's a great idea. And then when it got to, I'm a writer of graded readers for English language learners. How could you prove it? One girl just got a smartphone up and went, I've searched your name on Amazon. So, that's what we want our students to be doing, to be checking information. That's critical thinking. So you don't get fooled. And so you don't be tricked because you're looking for evidence to support the fact. Now, once you've done that and you've modeled that activity, they've learned a little bit about the teacher in the first class, then you get them in groups to do the same. They make 5 statements about themselves, some which are true, some which are false. Then you leave the false ones behind. Now let's look at the true ones. What evidence would you require to prove it? And then it becomes a fun introductory game, but it adds that layer of critical thinking where they're looking for evidence to support. And that worked wonderfully well with my students in the start of the second semester when I had a new class.
Bit of a technical announcement, procedural announcement, everyone. I do this every night. If you wish to ask our illustrious guests, Dr. Hadley, Dr. Boon, any questions, please prepare to raise your hand or turn on your camera or whatever else you need to do to ask your question. But I'll be doing that just a couple of minutes after we've gone through most of these questions. If you're watching us on Facebook and are looking at the comments, feel free to enter the comments in there, and I'll try to get them up to our guests as they come along. But if you want to join the room, the link is there for you to join us. Guys, what do you think? I mean, you could just say, well, no, there is no real problem with it, Jose. Do you feel that there's anything that teachers, if they're about to embark on this new project of bringing critical thinking into their classrooms, that it would behoove them to sort of change their own disposition before they actually start teaching? Is there a weakness that I would imagine that as trained social scientists, most of us are actually going to be pretty good at critical thinking, but maybe I shouldn't be making assumptions, because maybe there are a lot of people out there that teachers out there that could use an opportunity to sharpen up their own critical thinking skills. What should a teacher do to make sure that they're at their best when they're teaching something as important as critical thinking?
Yeah, I think that just because we are teachers at a university, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are good critical thinkers. And I know I need to, and I continue to read up on critical thinking books because I slip up all the time as well. It's easy to do. I think that before starting with teaching critical thinking, that they could read up on a number of the books in education on critical thinking on their own. And there's some other interesting books, like I think there's some people out there by the left, for example, Elder comes to mind, writes a lot of accessible books on critical thinking. One of them is like Critical Thinking 30 days or something of that nature, where you have a morning or afternoon or coffee break reading of something related to critical thinking, and you can spend a week. I think they said it's more like 30 weeks, I think, not 30 days, and you can do something, one sort of practice during the week to raise your to cultivate dispositions in critical thinking. I think that, and it's also good to have sort of a good definition of what they think critical thinking is, because some people find that critical thinking is, doing this or that. That may not be critical thinking. Just being able to ask questions in class, for example, doesn't necessarily mean that's critical thinking. Just being able to solve problems, well, that might be part of critical thinking, but how did you come to the solution?
And I mean, just to add to what Greg is saying, teaching is learning. So when we're asking our students to develop a disposition to critical thinking,
right,
we ourselves are developing that disposition too. And I know as a process of writing the book, I became more familiar with logical fallacies, and I began to spot them, that they became to be everywhere. And I entertained Greg a lot by sending screenshots of my naughty tweets to American politicians saying, oh, you scored the logical fallacy of the day, and then pointing out what fallacy they had done in their tweet. But I'm no longer on Twitter, so.
Yeah, he's a Macedon man now.
Yeah, but
I continue to study fallacies, because even though we have a list in our book, and it's based on lists that you'll find in other books as well, the trickier people out there that are really out there to try to deceive people through social media, they use combinations of fallacies. You can't say, oh, it's just this or this. They use these nice little mixtures and such. And so I try to spend time understanding what these people are doing. I'm just been over the past few days studying the just asking questions fallacy. The Rogaine set, like the Becks and the Tucker Carlsons and the hair guy on Ancient Aliens. They're just asking questions, and that's a sort of a fallacy, and also a rhetorical strategy of being able to say things without actually saying the things, and you use abduction, which can be a good thing if you have good data, but you get other people to answer the question according to the narrative that they've already set up. You manipulate them to come to that solution. They call it inferences to the best explanation, although you have bad data to make that explanation. I continue to study these really tricky strategies that people are using when they're actually deceiving people who haven't had training in critical thinking to kind of realize what's going on.
But what if Hunter Biden had top secret information on his laptop?
But
What if that laptop fell into the wrong hand? What if?
Yeah.
What if I'm actually a lizard wearing human skin? I'm just asking questions. It's right up there with like that famous question of when did you stop beating your wife?
Right, the loaded question. Yeah.
I'm just asking questions.
Yeah.
Andy, when I do presentations on my teaching method, and sometimes they're well received, sometimes they're not. But sometimes when they're well received, people will come up to me later and they say, wow, that was a really interesting thing that you presented about. But, my curriculum is full and I've got to teach this stuff from the ministry or from the administration. We've got all these targets within the curriculum. And I'd love to use your stuff, but I just want to have time for it. How do you take what you guys want to give to the rest of the world and bring it into a curriculum that is already preordained or is already pre-made for the teacher?
It's a really good question. Ideally, you're given the freedom to develop your critical thinking course at a university, and the faculty go, we want you to teach critical thinking, and you can use our book and build a curriculum from scratch. But if you do have material that you have to get through, go back to my prove it activity. It's just adding that layer of critical thinking to a well-established activity. We've all done true or false before, but maybe we haven't pushed it further into, okay, but what's the evidence for the truth? So, you could do this with anything. You're looking at a reading passage and what is the writer's agenda in writing this? That's a critical thinking question to identify, someone's agenda. So it is possible, we hope, that to add aspects of critical thinking to a syllabus. Obviously, it depends on what the syllabus is. If you're forced to teach grammar only, grammar translation, then it's going to be very difficult to introduce critical thinking to that. But if you're teaching like 4 skills, there will be opportunities within any course book that you've chosen or any material that you're using to definitely introduce the process, the cyclical process of critical thinking. I'm not sure if you'd be able to introduce the fallacies, but you'd definitely be able to introduce aspects of critical thinking.
And I think also it really depends on the status of the teacher, and their institution. But if they have the chance, they can try to start seeking out, for example, in the Japan context, Japanese faculty from maybe other disciplines that are also trying to help their students to think critically. They're out there, they really are. And sometimes we we don't ask, don't find out. But if we can find those people, then the students that we teach, and hopefully there's also teaching them as well, will get it from, different angles from different people. And that means that we don't have to feel like somehow, well, if I get this book on critical thinking and now I'm responsible for everything, you might find a way to have a more of a collegiate experience as you work with other teachers who are also interested in the students becoming better critical thinkers, because that also contributes to making a better society and to helping people to have better lives after they graduate.
I like your point, Andy, about pointing out that just about everyone, whether they even do it intentionally or not, has an agenda. And I remember one time I did try to sort of take that up with some of my students, and I showed them. I forget, it was a long time ago. It was a video from NHK, and I forget about the content, but I said, well, what do you think NHK is trying to do here? And I was getting a lot of blank looks, because I think the kids just make the assumption that, especially in Japan, if it's a government agency, all they want is to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And especially NHK, why would they want to do anything else except tell you the truth? Is it hard actually to get the kids to come to the point where they go, you're right, I really do have to assume that everyone has a particular agenda, or that there are problems in other people's thinking that I have to be aware of, or they are just surprised that this is even necessary?
I think it's case by case, isn't it? I think it depends on the individual. Some may come to it sooner. It's a little bit like realizing Santa Claus doesn't exist, isn't it? You're breaking the night.
Sorry, Andy, I told you not to talk about that. Not with Greg here. But
you're losing that innocence. That the world is a wonderful, comfy place where everyone tells the truth. So it's a hard thing to sell, isn't it? The reality. But it depends on the individual, I think, how cynical they are, or how ready they are, the mindset to not trusting, or thinking more carefully about what they trust, what they read, or something as simple as like asking students to check multiple sources before they believe. That's critical thinking.
But there still has to be a concept or a belief in the notion of truth.
Yeah.
One of the I was looking at something that a sociolinguist is writing about our book, and I think he's going to put it in a book review later on. But he did note that critical thinking in a lot of the social sciences had fallen by the wayside, because by having many groups of people we'll use this term, to speak their truth, truth became relativized.
Yeah.
So that getting the blank faces when NHK is telling their story, well, they're just speaking their truth. And so we get into a point of a critical, for me, I come from a critical realist perspective. We can't know all the truth, but we have to have a belief that truth does exist, and that if we work hard through logical thinking and through humility, knowing that we also don't understand everything, we can try to find out more of the truth, because without that we can't have a common conversation. We can't have a common understanding on what's right or what's wrong. Then it devolves into who has more power to impose their truth upon my truth, which is where our world is going in many places. So highlighting the issue of truth is another important issue, I think, for this.
And the activities introduce students to a lot of statements that they have to analyze and figure out what is wrong with the logic here, what is wrong with the reasoning. We think about the flat earth movement, and that could be a possible thing to start off with students, because I'm sure most students will have the concept that the earth is somewhat spherical in its shape and not flat.
Oh, flat earth. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, flat
earth. I was going to say what
you
you said.
Yeah. So, we do introduce this in the book, in some of the activities, about people who believe the earth is flat. And of course, it was believed many years ago. That was a truth that changes, It was believed that if we sail to the end of the earth, we'll fall off. But yeah, so it's, starting with these like theories, and students might think, well, yes, and some people believe this. So how would you deal with someone who believes that the earth is flat? What would you do? You send them off walking in a straight line and wait till they come back.
It'll take a while. Want to encourage everyone to start thinking about whatever questions they want to ask to our guests. And if you do have a question, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I already have a question here. But as a final thing that I wanted to ask you guys is, now that, this has been a 5-year process and you've gotten the book out the door and you had a little bit of feedback and stuff, do you think that your view on critical thinking in English language education, or how to bring it to the classroom, has somehow changed or evolved since before the time when you thought, let us write a book about critical thinking? Has something sort of evolved in all of that time that you spent writing the book? And now you think about critical thinking or teaching critical thinking in any kind of a different way? Andy?
I think now becomes the exciting part for us, but it's the part that we won't know. And that is how the readers take the information and take the material and use it in their classes for their own critical thinking classes. And that's going to be the exciting part. But unfortunately, as writers, you often don't get the feedback. You write something, you don't know how people respond to it usually. So we're going to be a little bit in the dark, but hopefully, there was a lovely comment. I have the book, highly recommend it. Thank you, Catherine. But, we don't know what magic is going to go on in the classroom as a result of teachers reading the book and we hope that they will contact us and go, hey, I tried activity number 72 and this happened and it was wonderful. So, maybe, I'm a big believer in death of the author, Roland Barthes, and maybe we've passed this on and we don't know what's going to happen next, but that's the exciting part. But for me, I would love for my faculty to say, hey, we know you've written this book. Do you want to do a critical thinking course? But I don't think it's going to happen looking at my schedule for next year, but I will try and add elements to the classes that I teach.
I think what changed for me is when I first began thinking about this and envisaging the way that critical thinking education should go in a second language learning context. I think I approached it much more in a mechanistic sort of way, almost like you had a flow chart. If you do this, then do this, and I've come to learn through working with Andy and also thinking about critical thinking, how for students, it's much more of a case of like maybe painting a piece of furniture, in the sense that, or painting something where you have to put on several coats and you also have to maintain that. There's going to be some degradation to people's critical thinking because throughout the day, once you start getting it, you get exhausted, as Andy can attest to. The billboards that touch, or the posters that touch our eyes, the commercials, the tricky statements that are given by talk show hosts, the meme after meme after meme that comes through on social media, and after a while, it does get through. And so, the idea of, what changed in me is you have to learn that critical thinking is something that has to be maintained for our good and for the good of others. Not that we go around, walking around like, aha, I caught you. Hey, that was such and such fallacy. Shame on you. No, but to try to make sure that you protect your own thoughts so people aren't getting into your head and twisting you towards their, intentions, but also that we can help other people too, and our students, and they can to make better decisions, to think about what we're doing, think about what other people are saying to us, and to try to make a better society in the process.
I don't know if I commented it before on how I thought it was a really great idea when you introduced it, that the first thing you want to do is actually, assess your disposition, or get ready to adjust your disposition towards the other person.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think, and maybe this is what you're trying to say, that if you just go straight into the whole logical sort of mechanics of taking apart a fallacious idea, you sort of, without telling the student at hand that this is something you want to do so that you can relate to human beings better and create a better civilization, that you end up creating just a lot of confrontation.
Right. Just you have a for the American context, so it's got Republican strategist or Democratic strategist written below their name. They're not listening to other people to understand. They're listening so they can try to prove their point. And you can train students to listen and to figure out how to prove their point by pointing out the errors. They're not learning anything. And all they're doing really is they're strengthening their assumptions, their underlying beliefs and assumptions that they had already. And that makes them actually it makes it even more difficult for them to think critically, to start out with the point of, maybe I'm wrong. And probably I don't know as much as I think I know. In fact, I need to think about how much I know and how much I really don't know about this subject, and maybe we can take up this conversation another time. And to approach it in a caring and humble manner, so that you can understand together, have better solutions together, and learn, more about what are the facts, what is true in this situation. What can we know and what can we not know? And why should we not argue about what we don't know until we find out more, if we can? Things like that, I think, are important.
Okay, don't see any hands up yet, but I do have a question here from Curtis. I believe it's Revis. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name, Curtis. And he asked me to read this question out to you, gentlemen. And I'm sorry if I may have sort of stepped on this question. I didn't read it until just now, but it goes like this. Curtis says, or asks, I have been teaching a critical thinking in English CLIL course at a technical college, and am preparing to publish my textbook. One of the difficulties I encounter is getting the students to independently ask critical thinking questions, even though the formation of such questions is one of the principal focuses of the course. Do you have any suggestions for how to get students in Japan out of the mindset of accepting the word of people in authority, in this case, the teacher, and into the role of an active critical thinker?
It's a very good question. There is one of the activities we have in the book, which is the start of this, is that there's an interrupting activity where the teacher makes lots of horrendous errors and carries on until students are willing to interrupt and correct. So, for example, saying like the capital of France is Marseille or something like that. Right. You can start with Japan. So yeah, I'm really interested to visit the capital of Japan, Osaka, next week, and see if anybody is going to allow you to keep making these terrible mistakes. And if they do, then introducing them to how to interrupt politely. The other day I was doing a debate class, and I was doing the final debates of the class, and I had everyone in a Teams meeting, and I'd made a mistake with a student's name, Kaito or Kota, and I thought Kota wasn't present in the class, and I thought he had to do the debate. So I was like, oh no, Kota's here, let me message Kota. I'd actually made a mistake. It was actually Kaito, and he just sat there and didn't correct me or didn't say, hey, Andy, it's actually, I'm the one who's in the debate. And then I finally realized when I read my notes more clearly, oh, sorry, I meant Kaito. So, starting with an activity where, you're having students, you're doing outlandish mistakes so that students interrupt, that gets them into maybe, it takes time, as Greg said, the painting of the sofa and the many coats, or the painting of the picture, wasn't it? Sorry, and the many coats. But
piece of furniture, not a sofa, though.
Yeah, I was thinking sofa. I don't know why.
Well, they
you're painting the upholstery at that point.
Yeah,
I was going to say, yeah, people paint sofas in the UK, don't they?
They do, probably. I have no idea. My brain is gone. But that idea of getting them to start feeling it's okay to interrupt, people in authority to correct them could be a starting focus to asking questions. And, you know, going back to the basic idea of question asking, with my students, if they feel kind of like reticent to ask questions, I do a stand-up, sit-down game. So, okay, everyone stand up. When you ask a question, you can sit down.
Yeah.
Suddenly you'll get a lot of questions.
Questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Sorry, Andy, I interrupted. Go ahead.
look, that's so I mean, it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy process. As we know, the education system has taught students to sit and receive the information and not to ask questions. So, and then our English class might be just the one 90 minutes of hey, ask me a question, come on, challenge me.
No, really.
So
Yeah.
when I was teaching in the UK, I was teaching D.H. Lawrence, and I remember one of the students thinking, what I was teaching Sons and Lovers, and I said the character Paul had a unnatural relationship with his mother, and she was accusing me of being sick. And I had to say, well, look, I'm sorry, but I've read all of the interpretations of Sons and Lovers, and this is what it says. But if you want to argue something different, as long as you can support it with evidence from the text, go ahead. But like the discussion and the debate and the attacks in Britain, completely different.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but they may not be critical.
Yeah, but
just because they ask questions doesn't mean that they're critical thinking questions.
Yeah. But so getting students to ask questions is a slow process.
A slow process.
But building it step by step.
Mm.
The painting of the picture or the furniture or whatever.
As long as it's not needed painting. Okay.
Kind of painting on, wax off. Right?
Yes, that's right.
We can have the students also, instead of asking the questions with their mouths, they can also write the questions down. Mm. And then they can have someone read them. You know, it's a step in the direction of being able to actually ask the question in class. But I've found that when it comes to, well, before the pandemic, when I have students actually write questions down, and yeah, Kahoot also works on that. I didn't use the high-tech versions, but I have them write down, you know, by hand questions. And you know, you have the critical thinking activities that Andy has presented. You can use that with students who may not want to speak, but they do have a question. And yes. They do want to think, and they can write it down. And after a while, you know, that's going to be cycled into their mind, into their system. And then you can have activities later on where you can have someone else ask the other person's question, so it's not, you know, it sort of deflects some of the nervousness that a student might have. Mm-hmm. And then the student who reads the other one's questions will also learn in the process from another student. No, go on.
I have another question here from Rob McLaughlin, but I just want to agree completely with both of you about just because the student isn't asking you, the teacher, in front of the other 28 students a question doesn't mean they don't have one. I found that out quite directly when I would send questions. I would send students into their breakout rooms and or ask them to record their conversations with each other back in 2021 when we were still in the middle of the pandemic. And the students that I thought were being very, very quiet, it turned out that when they were just in an individual room by themselves and recording their conversations, that they were actually able to make their own questions with each other, even if it was on the spot and it was an unrehearsed conversation. Just because they don't want to ask you, the teacher, doesn't mean they don't have a question. They just want to ask you, but they don't mind asking their friends.
Yeah, because of online teaching, I use Teams at my school, and I create all of my courses through Teams. So the capability or the possibilities for homework are just endless now. So I teach a discussion and debate class, but giving them sort of audio homework so that they record a response. They read something from Uzella and then they respond to it, or they do a little bit of research with their family. So I was doing like questions about gender, and I spoke to my father about gender in Japan. It was really good. And you get all of these like amazing comments that you wouldn't get in the classroom, but they're doing it for homework. So going back to Curtis's question, writing the question, after the lesson, the homework activity could be to think of critical thinking questions that could then be used, submitted for homework and then used in the next class.
Yeah, yeah. The question from Rob McLaughlin, I might have to sort of translate this a bit. I think I understand what he's trying to ask. He says, wondering if there is a way to find out if critical thinking is being taught in education classes, e.g., future teachers, overt teaching of critical thinking skills. So I think what he means is in teacher training courses, what is actually, or do you guys know of any sort of programs or of individual teachers who take it upon themselves to make sure that these teachers, as they're being taught to go out into the high schools and junior high schools, have some knowledge of the necessity to make sure that the students they teach themselves have these skills? Do you know of anything like that?
I'll just say something before I pass over to Greg. Chapter 4 of the book is about researching critical thinking. And that is one hell of a research question. So I'll pass that back to Rob. Why don't you go and research that? Because that would be a really good article. If you can get access to teacher training programs and do some kind of analysis of what critical thinking aspects are being taught to teacher trainees, then that would be really good research project to do. And Rob could come on OTJ and talk about his results after. So that's my suggestion for Rob.
There you go.
Yeah.
Greg, did you have a suggestion?
What suggestion or the
or knowledge thereof of these programs that are designed to actually during teacher training address critical thinking?
All I know about is my university and my experience, and I've never encountered in the teacher training programs or for students when I was at another university that aspired to take the test for an English teacher, even though it was not as many education-based classes for them. But at any rate, there's no course that I've encountered where you have like a critical thinking course. And in fact, those types of courses have been cut out of the curriculum in Western universities as well. And a lot of them, you won't find them anymore. But where I find that people who are aspiring to become teachers, high school teachers or junior high school teachers, get some sort of critical thinking training is when they write their graduation paper. They're doing their final research project. And there they have this back and forth sort of Socratic approach with their Japanese supervisor or supervisors to help them clarify their thinking and their argumentation. Now, if is that enough for it to carry through into their teaching when they go to the high school? I don't know, and I kind of have my doubts, but I don't know. Maybe so. I mean, people. We don't want to give the impression that, most of the people out there are not thinking critically. We've got some smart people here in this society here in Japan, and they do think critically. You'll find them all around you, but I don't think I really don't think there's a course I've ever encountered where they have that critical thinking, but they do teach it sort of in the way of trying to cultivate dispositions in people through the interaction with the teachers, especially since they're graduate. They're going to be, they're going to high school. They're not. I was thinking for a moment about the graduate school when I was talking about this. For the high school level student, no.
Okay. I can give Rob, if you're still watching us, I can give you one suggestion. When I first asked Dr. Charlie Brown to come on to the show almost a year ago now, or over a year ago now. The reason why I asked him is because he just released a textbook based on critical thinking. And I asked him to come onto the show and talk about that. We never did talk about that very much, but I do know that Charles Brown, his specialty is actually doing teacher training. He has written a textbook based on critical thinking. So if there's anybody who knows most about it, that at least that I know of, it would be Dr. Charlie Brown at Meiji Gakuen. So if you contact him, maybe you can either speak to him directly, or he can set you on a good path and finding out what other teacher trainers are up to.
I'm sure Rob knows Charlie as well. So
Yeah, there you go. Let's see. I don't see any other questions. Come on, you guys. This is your last chance. While you guys are thinking about what questions you might have in the last, I don't know what we got here. I think about 5 minutes. While they're thinking, I'm just going to do a little bit of PR for the next OTJtv and tell you that the next guest will be coming along on February 11th, which is a Saturday, and her name is Rachel Roberts. Not directly an OTJ member, but I found out about her through Dorothy Zemak. And to make the story short, Rachel runs a Facebook group that is based on fostering and mentoring individuals who want to actually go out there as entrepreneurs within the realm of English language education, who want to do language coaching, or who want to do specifically training in IELTS or training in TOEFL. And I think, you know, the way that the economy is going and the way the world is going, I think there'll be a lot more people who are looking to do a little bit more than just a side hustle and maybe move it towards something a little bit bigger. I just one last question. If no one else is asking one.
Just a second. February the 11th is a Saturday, and it says Wednesday on the thing. So.
Oh my gosh, I better fix that before I actually put that out there. Thank you very much for those sharp eagle eyes.
Was Linda also pointed that out? Linda K.
Thanks, Linda. She's really good at picking up my typos. Thank God I have friends. And speaking
Curtis seems to have a question.
Oh, he does?
Okay,
one question. Go ahead, Curtis. Just saw that just now.
Alan had a question too, but I answered it kind of. Okay.
Greg, what would you say is the difference between critical thinking and logical thinking?
I'm glad he asked, Greg.
Logical thinking is much more of a formalized way of thinking. You can it's sort of this. There are certain patterns of thought and certain studies of argumentation, of proofs and things that are not proofs. Critical thinking is a little squishier than that. I think I think that Andy and I have worked out our working definition for that, for critical thinking, is that it's a mental skill that helps people to ask questions, to try to understand the underlying beliefs that we have and that other people have, to learn about assumptions of the message that they're encountering from their friends and on TV and what they say themselves. And critical thinking is to respond in a intellectually humble manner, so that people can learn to better understand each other, find better solutions, and to discover more about what's true, and more about what we know and what we don't know. But logical thinking, I think, would be much more of of sort of a working engine that would fit within a wider realm of critical thinking.
Do you have an example in the book, Greg? We have the example of premise 1, all English teachers carry pens. Premise 2, all doctors carry pens. False conclusion, all doctors are English teachers. We do have that in the book.
Well, both of these English teachers in front of me are actually doctors.
Yeah, we were thinking more of medical doctors.
I know. I was kind of joking about that one.
Yeah.
Still don't see any questions, so I'm just going to make this one last question, because I know that we have to send you guys off, and before we do, I want to say thank you very much. That was great. I actually have the luxury of getting a new class with some pretty high level students, and I'm free to write the syllabus on my own, and I'm going to be incorporating a lot of the things out of your book as soon as I get it into my little hands. Artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, has been in the topic of a lot of OTJ threads lately. With the onset of ChatGPT 3 and the coming train of ChatGPT 4, which is bound to be about 10 times more shall we say, knowledgeable and able to mimic human language output. Do you think that bodes well for critical thinking? And do you think this is another bog that we have to walk through that we didn't have to walk through before? The idea that artificial intelligence can maybe muck up our critical thinking because maybe rely on it too much? or it'll actually make it harder for us to tell when the sources of information that we have are lying? What do you think this AI boom is going to do for something like critical thinking?
Wasn't it you, Greg, who posted about Mike's mother has 4 sons, John, Simon, Steve. What's the name of the first son? And ChatGPT couldn't answer it. It was like, well, it's impossible.
That wasn't Greg. No, that was
that wasn't
it might have been Mike Lyons or Thomas
Yeah,
Hamilton.
someone posted that recently, and I was like, yes.
Yeah, you're stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think though that wouldn't be eventually sort of stepped over in the next iterations of artificial intelligence?
What if artificial intelligence takes over? What if we all become subservient? What if it's all the matrix? What if we are batteries just to fuel the... No, sorry.
Just asking questions, right?
Yeah,
I'm just asking questions. And when did you stop beating your wife, by the way? No.
Yeah.
But do you have any thoughts on the topic is basically what I'm asking.
Well, I'm not sure if ChatGPT will have an effect on critical thinking, because I think it's kind of that these are maybe very different topics. Because of course, you know, you can, if you think about maybe an essay or something, an essay question, the student goes to ChatGPT and types in the essay question and gets maybe a good answer. The students, you know, not really learning anything, I suppose, in that case. They're not thinking it out on their own. But I suppose we can also take this and look at it another possible way, is that, you know, the student is going to, if they write that answer out or type that answer out or just paste that answer out, they might learn something from the answer that they get from ChatGPT if they read it. If the teacher reads it and finds out that, well, because ChatGPT, at least right now, you know, it does a lot of dancing around. And sometimes it double talks, and it also sometimes lies. You know, it gives false information too. The student's not aware of that. The teacher can find that out, and if they're in a you know, a mood to engage the students, say, you know, I think this might be from somewhere else, and it's just between you and me on that. But, you know, let's look at some of the mistakes here, and let's think about some of the things that are here, and engage the student to think with them if they've got the time and the language proficiencies are they're able to do that. But I think what I might be hearing is that the use of ChatGPT will possibly result in more and more people not thinking. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what I'm fearing.
That's what you're fearing, yeah. And I don't know, maybe for some people.
You know, it's funny you said, you know, the more technology advances, the less we think. Just in my class today, you know, we had a 3 class, so my students wanted to know about my life, and they asked many questions, which was good. And I talked about when I was backpacking in the old days and trying to contact my parents, and I was saying to the students there was no smartphone, there was no internet. My mum thought, you know, I'd been killed in a ditch in Europe until she finally got a postcard through the post, Paris. And the idea of like using maps to find the youth hostel rather than Google Maps, you know, you actually use a physical, you go to the tourist information, you actually ask the person who passes a physical map to you that you have to work out and find the way. It's a lot of thinking.
You know, math teachers who would complain about, you know, calculators, you know, and statistics software. And
there's a joke, isn't it, where the math teacher says to the student, you won't have something like a calculator in the back of your pocket when you grow up. It's like, what?
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, you do. I mean, and again, you know, mathematics and calculators is maybe that's also not equivalent to what we're thinking about either. But maybe ChatGPT can be if once a person gets education at a certain level, ChatGPT can be a helpful tool to give them some possible ideas on what direction they might want to take or not take in thinking about something. But I don't think that ChatGPT is directly related to critical thinking, but I could be wrong. I mean, what do you think? I mean, I think you're wrong. Give me some reasons why you think I'm wrong.
Oh, you are asking me, or you're sort of like throwing a statement out there?
Throwing it out there, but it's also Linda's got a question too.
Oh, Linda. Where did Linda's question go? Because I've got a bunch of direct messages here.
She's raised her hand.
Oh, she's raised her hand. Linda, go ahead. You want to open up your mic or turn on your camera? Or type your question? Oh, wait a minute. That's right. Sorry, Linda. Let's see here. Unmute themselves. Okay, Linda, you can unmute yourself now.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
I don't know if I dare say this on a recording or not.
Go for it.
I was asked to write an evaluation recently. I spent 2 weeks evaluating a colleague and wrote 2 pages on all of her, research and teaching, committee work, everything. They wanted a tiny little paragraph that would fit in the box in a form. So yesterday afternoon, I just put all of her qualifications into ChatGPT, and they gave me a very good evaluation, and I changed it and made it appropriate to my colleague, and that was what they wanted. So
did you just use the whole thing as
oh
is?
no, I could not. It had to be edited.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that's what I think GPT, excuse me, and later iterations of this will be used as, we live in a texted world, and so much that we have to write and do, and so this could be, a help to help structure our thoughts.
And also, when you're writing in Japanese and English, pronouns are not used in Japanese. They're necessary in English. That had to be corrected. And there were several things that it was absolutely not acceptable as it came out of ChatGPT, but it took me only 10 minutes to fix it and turn it in by the deadline.
Yeah, I understand that. So you used some common sense and probably some critical thinking as well to help that. I noticed that David, I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
Yuto.
Sorry. He asked ChatGPT if they could help if it could help develop critical thinking skills, and ChatGPT says yes.
Yes. What an odd answer. I wasn't predicting that at all.
Yes, I can develop critical thinking skills by providing information and resources on a variety of topics, as well as by engaging users in conversations and discussions that encourage them to analyze and evaluate information, consider multiple perspectives, and make well-reasoned arguments. Additionally, asking probing questions and providing feedback can help to sharpen a person's critical thinking abilities. And this is a good example of ChatGPT waffling, because if you start to unpack a lot of the jazzed up English here, it's not saying a whole heck of a lot. Basically, it says to me, well, I provide information for people to think about. So that's critical thinking. And so
I guess ChatGPT will make a good politician in the future.
Yeah.
Sorry, Greg, we could take that response and use it in a critical thinking activity and say, everybody, analyze this. What is the agenda here? Why would ChatGPT automatically say yes and then not actually be able to tell you exactly why in a more cogent manner? I think would be really good.
I wonder what ChatGPT's overall agenda is. Has anyone asked it? World dominance.
Money for open AI, of course, and it already has. Microsoft has said we're going to pump yet another $10 billion into a.
Well, ChatGPT will say, my job is to help you You
Of
know,
course.
you know,
It is what it said.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just here to be of service. Yeah, we should analyze that critically. Gentlemen, thank you very much for a wonderful evening. Most informative. I think a lot of people will be wanting to. Greg, you got that book again?
Oh,
I put the link to the book in the thanks, Andy. Put the link to that book. There it is, right there in the chat here in the comments in the Facebook thread. And it'll be popping up all over the video recording that I will be making available in a couple of days on the Facebook group. Thank you very much both for coming. Good luck with the sales of the book. I hope they're going really, really well. And I hope you guys can come back again sometime to OTJtv.
Great. Thanks for having us.
No, it was.
yeah.
pleasure
And thanks
as
for all the
always.
good questions. There
Thanks
was
everyone for your valuable time joining.
Yeah.
You know, we're all busy people, so thank you everyone who's given the time to watch or join the Zoom. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it.
Hey, everybody. Thanks a lot. Good night.